Friends, my name is Vasyl Pekhno. I'm a Ukrainian journalist, and I invite all of you to watch this latest update on Ukrainian battle map situation as of October the 11th. So please join and watch this video, like it, share it, subscribe, and leave your comments just below the video. Let's begin today's overview.
As usual, we'll talk about how we've lived through this week over the past 7 days. We'll use the Deep State Map resource to review and look over everything that's happening on our front. And today, as a priority, I will start with the Pokrovsk direction, because it has been and still remains the main point of attack for the enemy, even though, according to this week's data, the enemy has redeployed some of its units from the south of Pokrovsk to the Novopavlivka direction, since they realized that in Novopavlivka, the enemy is having somewhat more success, so they need to redeploy there. They need to ensure movement on the front. They need to try to break through. To break through this gap they have created in the defense of our units, but we'll see whether this will turn out to be the right move for the Russians. Nevertheless, even despite the partial redeployment of forces there, even despite the statement by the chief of the Russian General Staff, Gerasimov, that here in Zaporizhzhia will be the site of the enemy's main strike, and now the priorities have been set on Primorsk and Stepnohirsk. The main zone of combat operations remains this very strip. And during this week that we have lived through, friends, the Russians have been quite active in conducting their offensive actions in this same strip. Moreover, notably with the use of armored vehicles. So this is actually a remarkable story. Armored vehicles haven't been used on the front for a very long time, but the Russians actually started using them this week near Pokrovsk. On the so-called Okeretine direction, as our soldiers call it, because the direction of our potential future advance, when it happens, will be toward the settlement of Okeretine. So, starting from Okeretine, which serves as a base for stationing Russian equipment, the Russians carried out a series of 8 to 9 attacks in several directions at the junction of the Dobro-Pilia-Pokrovsk agglomeration, or the Dobro-Pilia-Pokrovsk direction, and the Kostiantynivka direction. In particular, these attacks in October were mainly focused on 2 areas, from the settlement of Novo-Olenivka towards Kostiantynivka, that is here, and from Shakov and Volodymyrivka between Rusin Yar and Yablonivka. They blew up an ammonia pipeline, and the residual effects with the compression of ammonia began to create corresponding plumes of smoke, clouds of vapor. These are dangerous to human health. In this way, the Russians are demonstrating their activity in this section of the front. What happened here in Novo-Olenivka was shown in footage by the soldiers of the 93rd Mechanized Brigade. The Russians deployed about 8 units of their armored vehicles here. It is expected not only, well, this was on the 8th, I believe, and on the 9th as well, assaults were expected. And in the end, they did take place also with the use of equipment by the enemy. The intensity of the enemy's use of equipment is expected to remain high. I will now briefly explain the logic behind this process, why it is happening this way. First of all, because the Russians are currently stuck out in the open field. I have repeatedly said that, in principle, their objective until the autumn-winter period, until late October or early November, when the battlefield will be completely transparent due to the fact that all the greenery, so-called, in the forest will be completely destroyed and the Russians will not be able to advance. Why won't they be able to advance? As of today, let's say the enemy's main priority is to enter populated areas. Up to now, the Russians have managed to enter only one large populated area. This is the city of Kupiansk, where they can take cover, hide in the ruins, and somehow advance under cover of concrete structures that exist in the city of Kupiansk, as it is quite a large district center. They have not managed to do this in any other direction. Their priority was not even entering the settlement itself, because, I repeat, there they can hide from drone strikes. Right now, there is nowhere to hide from drones. In open fields, it's simply total death. It's impossible to stay in the open field. You can stay in the tree lines, all the more so during the summer and early autumn. You could stay there since the tree lines were quite safe in terms of detection. They were covered by what we call greenery, that is leaves, the green canopy of trees, bushes, and other gifts of nature. Now, in late autumn or even mid-autumn, the leaves fall, the yellow leaves drop, and the battlefield becomes completely bare. The Russians, in many directions except for Kupiansk, have remained in the open field. For them, this is like a death sentence, and they have no other way out. Now, you can't advance infantry anymore. No matter how much you try to hide, drones will spot you because there will be no greenery. So it's quite likely that in the coming weeks, they, maybe even for months, will try to carry out their attacks mainly using equipment. all the more so because they tried to save their equipment during the summer period when they attacked mainly and exclusively with infantry. Now they will try to use equipment as a kind of taxi for such infantry, and this is exactly what explains these enemy assaults in the Kostiantynivka, Dobropilya, and Pokrovsk directions. And by this, and by the worsening weather conditions, because the worsening weather conditions will lead to the fact that there is a hypothesis, yes, that drones won't be able to fly because in really bad weather, it's hard to fly a drone. In fog or heavy rain, it's difficult to operate a drone. They get lost. Accordingly, the enemy, realizing this, has now, during this period of bad, rainy and foggy weather, decided to take advantage of the worsening conditions and launch assaults in this area. Let me highlight it again, near Novolenivka. All the attacks this week here have been very intense, but the largest assaults by the enemy were carried out in the direction of the settlements of Volodymyrivka and Shakove. Specifically regarding Volodymyrivka and Shakov, and more precisely about Volodymyrivka. Deep State posted yesterday that although a lot of enemy equipment was destroyed here, the worst part is that the enemy managed to land their troops here. According to Deep State's estimates, we're talking about several dozen infantry units that were landed here. And at least 16 pieces of heavy equipment in 3 waves throughout the day, twice 7 armored vehicles each time, and in the evening the Russians sent in 2 more tanks. In total, 16 pieces of military equipment and 6 motorcycles were involved in the assault operations in this direction. Although Deep State reported that there was a landing force deployed there and the situation in Volodymyrivka is currently extremely difficult, but there is no further update yet. Later, a media communication was provided, let's say, by the 1st Corps of the National Guard, Azov, which is holding the defense in this direction. So what did they say about the defense? That in this sector there was indeed a large-scale assault by the enemy. Here is the big video showing how this assault took place. In total, the Azov fighters report that more than 16 pieces of equipment were used, actually not up to 35, but exactly 35 units of heavy armored vehicles. These were tanks and armored fighting vehicles that the enemy sent into the assault. They did indeed manage to land infantry. Azov gives a specific number, 32 infantrymen, 12 of whom were eliminated immediately upon landing. The remaining 20 tried to hide in the ruined houses of Volodymyrivka, in the basements of Volodymyrivka, and throughout the evening and night of October 9th to 10th, the crews of heavy bombers, including Vampires, worked on these shelters, destroying the enemy infantry there. As of the morning of October 10th, according to Azov, no movement of enemy infantry was observed in Volodymyrivka. The enemy's assault had failed. The total enemy losses out of these 35 units of heavy armored vehicles amounted to 1 armored recovery vehicle, 3 tanks, and 16 armored fighting vehicles, a total of 20 armored vehicles out of 35. Additionally, the enemy lost not 6, but 41 motorcycles and 2 light vehicles. Confirmed enemy personnel losses for that day during the attacks, according to Azov, amount to 107 irrecoverable, that is, 200 destroyed occupiers. Sanitary losses, 51 people. The main direction was the command post at Shakov. We will return to it now, and I will explain why it was so important. Well, and the strikes were mainly carried out by 3 components. These were artillery, unmanned systems, and advanced engineering preparations. That is, mining the area, which made it possible to destroy the enemy there as well. Let's say in advance, this is what our soldiers were also doing here. By the way, the Phoenix unit of the State Border Guard Service was also involved in repelling this attack, and the corresponding video was published on their social media. So our mixed team, as it worked before, continues to operate in the Dobropilya direction, but well, under the command of Azov, thank God it is working successfully. So Azov says that the main target of the enemy was the strong point at Shakov. And that's not surprising because Shakov is essentially the decisive defensive position in this area. The Russians even made this desperate push from Dobropilya specifically to break through here, bypassing Shakov on the left flank of their advance. Later, they started moving through Poltavka and Popiev Yar to try to squeeze this extremely important point of our defense from the flanks with their right flank and encircle it. At the moment, the enemy has not succeeded in this, but they are focusing their efforts precisely on this settlement because it is essentially the key to our defense here. In general, the struggle, the carnage taking place in the Dobropilya-Pokrovsky direction is of an absolutely fantastically high intensity. The Russians have already rushed to claim that these breakthroughs into Volodymyrivka, which they have carried out, are successful, that they have regained control, that they have captured Volodymyrivka. As we can see, both videos and their own data and statements on social media refute this. The fighters from Azov, whom we absolutely and totally trust, confirm this. This is also confirmed by the fighters of the 225th Assault Regiment, who have published the following. This is a screenshot from the 225th page, where they respond to the Russian public channel Archangel Spetsnaz, which claims that they have allegedly captured our troops. You see, today they claim there is an assault, that they have seized equipment, and that they have supposedly entrenched themselves on the outskirts. Well, here, in fact, the 225th writes, "Where are you there? If you've really entrenched yourselves, then tell us better. How many of your fighters were eliminated during this attack? Well, then tell us how many of your own you lost there yesterday and today, and also talk about the equipment you used for the assault. Where is it now? According to my information, all these attacks were indeed repelled." Deep State is slightly, let's say, adjusting this data. They emphasize that the enemy is advancing here, and unfortunately they are present. We'll see how it all ends. But the fighting is taking place not only in this direction, but also in the area of Rodynske. Because right now in Rodynske itself, the National Guard of Ukraine, the Refuge unit, this is the 4th Brigade of the National Guard of Ukraine, published footage of the enemy being destroyed precisely on the northern outskirts of Rodynske, where the occupiers had previously created a gray zone by expanding it. In addition, in Fedorivka, in this settlement, friends, a drop was recorded of water from our bomber, which was carried out by the National Guard soldiers of the Refuge Brigade. And what does this mean? If there is a water drop there for the positions of our fighters, it means that our fighters are there. This means that the situation is not as transparently red as it is marked on the Deep State map. In principle, actually, on the Dobropilya-Pokrovsk direction, it's worth saying that here there's a whole kind of pie, a layer cake of positions. It's very difficult to determine who's ours and who's the enemy, especially for the artillerymen. With the methods that, in fact, we and the Deep State team are using, trying to figure out what's happening on the battlefield. The third location is Krasny Lyman, on the outskirts of Rodynske, and here the enemy is already present, and our Su-27 of the Air Force of the Armed Forces of Ukraine is striking them, destroying enemy positions right in Krasny Lyman itself with airstrikes. So everything is mixed up. Very intense, high-intensity fighting is taking place right now in this section of the Dobropilya-Pokrovsky front. And that's why, to talk about and somehow react to Gerasimov's statements, who claims that supposedly the occupiers will now shift the focus of their military actions towards Zaporizhzhia, well, in my opinion, this is nothing more than an information attack. Of course, we will continue to monitor what is unfolding and how it is unfolding in Zaporizhzhia, but as of today, things remain as they were. The main direction of the enemy's attack is precisely the Dobropilya-Pokrovsk axis. A little further south of Dobropilya and Pokrovska, where the enemy was actually moving its reserves, is the Novopavlivsky direction. These are the areas right here.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Darkne, Filia, and Ivanovka. And these are the areas here at the junction of Donetsk, Dnipropetrovsk, and Zaporizhzhia regions, where the countering the enemy, assault groups from assault regiments are operating. For example, the assault battalion Okor is demonstrating the destruction of the enemy, who expanded the gray zone in the settlement of Oleksiivka. Yesterday, I showed footage of how our tank worked against enemy positions here. Now, there are drops from heavy bombers from Vampir and IPV, as demonstrated by the fighters. The 214th Separate Assault Battalion Okor is currently stabilizing the situation in this direction, essentially on the Novopavlivka axis. As a rapid response group, they very often demonstrate a quick reaction to where the enemy is breaking through. From this, we can conclude that if the enemy is already present in such a gray zone in Oleksiivka, it means that reinforcements are indeed arriving here. However, they are unable to secure their positions and advance further in Okor. For now, they cannot, although, to be honest, the Novopavlivka direction is currently the worst for us in terms of the enemy's advance trends compared to any other section of the front. This week as well, as part of the week's summary, there were statements about the Lyman front, particularly from Commander-in-Chief Siversk, that our forces have stabilized the situation in Yampil. In fact, the situation in Yampil has indeed been stabilized for quite some time already, but according to my information, just yesterday I was in contact with the soldiers who are holding the defense in this Yampil-Lyman-Siversk section of the front. Here the situation remains very difficult because from Yampil, from the north, from the forested area, there is quite a large gray zone here. The enemy manages to reach the outskirts of the settlement, the village of Yampil, where very fierce fighting is ongoing. And it is clear that our soldiers are holding their ground here. The pressure is causing such exhaustion. Well, I understand that this is a trend across the entire front, exhaustion from the enemy's assaults, which they carry out here relentlessly. Of course, the drone operators are working exceptionally well, compensating for our shortage of personnel in this area. But it's also important to talk about specific things. Fighting is already taking place in some places on the outskirts of Siversk. You can see that the gray zone reaches Siversk. We can even Google it and look at the administrative boundaries of this settlement. Here on the deep state map, it runs exactly along the northeastern edge of Siversk, but according to my information, the enemy is already reaching the very borders of Siversk in some places. However, for the present moment, they are completely unable to engage in full-scale extensive battles for this particular settlement, but, well, the undeniable fact still remains. The enemy has ambitions for Siversk, and this settlement could become the second one they enter after Kupiansk in the context of this attempt to secure some concrete overhead so they can spend the winter there, wait things out, and survive the development of drone technologies at the front as the context of kill zones expands. The situation in Lyman is actually very tense, even though, as I said, the commander-in-chief claims it has been stabilized. On that note, I'll put a period today. Thank you, friends, for your attention. Take care of yourselves